The government certainly hasn't fallen short of directly naming individual journalists as traitors. In particular, the Labour Minister, Mervyn Silva, who again many of you will be familiar with, is an absolute firebrand in terms of both physically attacking media directly himself, as well as calling various journalists LTE friendly or singular tigers and so on and so forth. This puts them in a very direct threat, of course. And the Ministry of Defence website also regularly carries vilifications of journalists. I think it's also important to stress the fact that the areas where the media has been most under threat and continues to be most under threat is in the north and the east. It's definitely the Tamil language media who have been most regularly attacked and often very, very blatantly, often without any consideration to any sorts of press freedom concerns at all, of course. One example of that was that World Press Freedom Day, the UNESCO event, was held in Colombo on the 5th of May, in 2006. And on that same day, gunmen attacked the Uthayyan office in Jaffna and killed 3 of their staff members. And that was the same day that the President gave a speech talking about the importance of press freedom to the Sri Lankan authorities. I think one of the ironies, one of the tragedies of the situation, and again I think this reflects the quote from Lasanta himself, is that too late did the singular language media and the English language media really wake up to the fact that the threats against the Tamil language media were multiplying and spreading also to them. And in 2008 we've seen a real escalation of attacks, particularly on those covering defence issues, to individuals like Keith Noyer, Namal Pereira, and of course in January this year to Lasanta himself, who was murdered. We have seen, despite the requests of the international mission process, we have seen no action by the authorities, no serious investigations, and certainly nobody being brought to court for those cases. The case of Tisa, of course, was also mentioned. A photograph, of course, of Lasanta, which you can click again, and a picture of Podula, who was, as it says there, who went into hiding in 2009 and then returned after 3 months of exile. On his return, was then abducted and very severely beaten. So this case, I think, has been the centre of attention certainly for our organisations, and I think for Amnesty as well has paid a lot of attention to this. And we've had very lengthy discussions both with him and his wife Renata, and have followed the case very, very closely and put a lot of advocacy into it as well. So the fact that he was then not charged, but the fact that he was then found guilty only in August and received a prison sentence of 20 years on the allegations, on the conviction of receiving money from the LTTE and causing racial hatred through his writings, which are completely ludicrous, was obviously a great disappointment. This certainly is not the end of his case, and we will be pursuing it further, together also with the 2 other persons who were arrested on the same charges as him. There's a number of also other laws that stand that need to be reformed, that put pressure on journalists, things like the emergency regulations, the Official Secrets Act, the Press Council law, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, obviously in connection with this case, as well as many other ways in which the government puts pressure on the media, such as having the Inland Revenue authorities do audits of various media institutions, bank accounts freezing, courts freezing bank accounts, and so on and so forth. In terms of the current situation and the future sort of prognosis that we have, with the end of the, let's say, conventional conflict, the battlefield conflict, we have watched very closely to see whether we could see any possible thawing from the Sri Lankan authorities, to see whether we could discern any kind of improvement on the horizon. And I have to say, unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case. And an opportunity, a very great opportunity, is really being missed. The continued threats against newspapers like Ravia and Uthayyan only in recent months and weeks, continuing direct threats from government ministers such as the Labour Minister again, who was quoted only in July as actually saying, quite amazingly, Lasanta from the Leader paper went overboard. I took care of him. Podula, the other man we just saw, agitated and his legs were broken. And this is from a government minister. And he has also been directly harassing and attacking journalists, particularly also from MTV. It's quite an amazing situation. Having said this, I think there is some hope on the horizon in that sense. The media community and the press freedom community, which has been very broken up because of the pressure on them, is rallying. The new press council law, which the government wants to push through, is seeing resistance from a number of different actors, and they're coming together and having a joint conference on it in the near future. The Editors Guild recently awarded a prize to Humanitarian newspaper, and this is particularly important because the Editors Guild represents a very traditional conservative element of the singular English and Tamil media community, and offering it to Humanitarian newspaper, which has been demonized beyond belief, was a very positive step. And I think also journalists who are in exile have organized themselves more efficiently. The recent, what has been called the Channel 4 video of the killings of Tamil civilians by the army came from that group, or came through that group into some description, to some degree. And also, I think the last thing of worrying concern, and this again is reflected in Yolanda's comments, is that we now see a spread of the same tactics to the south of the country, to other areas and away from the Tamil media explicitly. I think this shows that the government doesn't really have much intention of giving up the tools that it's devised for itself to control the press. Thank you.
I can't help it really, because of the interesting amount of material that we have to get through. It's very difficult to be shorter. But it means I'm going to have to be fairly tight with any questions that anybody has now about press freedom for Thomas. And is there anybody who wants to ask any questions? This gentleman over there.
I think it's generally been that Sri Lanka has not featured high on the international agenda, and international media coverage tends to cover those issues which are following the international agenda. I think there has been, I think it's sort of an understatement to say that there hasn't been any coverage. I think certainly towards the end of the conflict, certainly some of the tape that's come out, the Channel 4 tape and so on, has received a lot of attention. And the international media, we've actually worked as a group quite hard to get more media attention, both in national countries and on an international level, and that certainly has increased over time. But I think unless it's one of the real international hotspots, it simply doesn't hit the agenda.
I'm going to take one more question on the media. Is there anybody else more fundamental problems about what's happening in Sri Lanka? But maybe if you wanted to talk a little bit about how the difficulties with press freedom relate to the wider issues and how they go hand in hand. In other words, how the press reports on the activities that are going on in Sri Lanka and how those two things connect with each other.
I mean, I'll answer sort of both. I think it's very important to bear in mind that the most severe repression on freedom of expression within Tamil communities actually comes, or has come traditionally, if you can use that word, from the LTTE. They have most disastrously stamped on freedom of expression within the Tamil community. And they have left, now they're gone of course, they have left in their wake only media institutions which were somehow walking a very fine balance, middle line, very brave media institutions. And the tragedy is that now we see the government, as you're saying, coming in and wiping out those remaining institutions, or at least making a really concerted effort to do so, if not directly themselves, through their proxy organizations and proxy militia. So I would certainly not disagree that freedom of expression within Tamil communities has been massively under threat for decades, and remains under threat. I think in answer to the slightly broader question, the tragedy that we've seen is that particularly within the country itself, the singular media and the English language media have really been rather uninterested in the plight of Tamil communities in the north and east, and have actually focused very little time and attention on those issues. Have been very ready just to take government press releases, which are wild and fantasy sometimes, and really haven't made any concerted effort to send anybody to the north and east to cover these issues. Now there are exceptions to this, I should say, there are some exceptions. But that's been the general trend. And so there's been a complete lack of information in the rest of the country about what has been going on in the north and the east. I think many average Sri Lankans simply don't know what's happening in the north and the east and are completely ignorant to it, and therefore disbelieve anybody who comes up with an alternative version of that truth, or the truth.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave there. Thank you very much, Thomas, for that.